Okay, welcome everyone to this IPR webinar. Good afternoon, wherever you're calling in from. Feel free to share in the chat where you're calling in from today. I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia. It's always great to see representation from all over the country or internationally even, so we appreciate you joining us. Today we have a webinar with featuring members from our IPR Measurement Commission. They are hosting a webinar on some of the insights that will be featured in our upcoming Public Relations Journal, or Volume 18, Issue 1. And our webinar will be on AI and PR and responsible measurement for impactful communication. Today we have Dr. Julie O'Neill. She is a professor and associate dean of graduate studies and administration at Texas Christian University. We also have our director of the IPR Measurement Commission and head of insights at Fullintel, Angela Dwyer, who's joining us. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Lightning Czabovsky, associate professor of the university at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So today, they're going to get into a little bit more about themselves and the journal and the findings there. But I just have a few housekeeping notes for you. This is being recorded, and we're going to share the recording within 48 hours via email and on our website and YouTube channel. So any resources discussed today will also be attached. And then if you have any technical difficulties, just message me or any IPR staff member, and we'll help you sort that out. And then last but not least, we will have time for questions. So please feel free to engage with each other in the chat and submit any questions you may have in the Q&A function. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Julie, Dr. O'Neill, to kick off our webinar.
All right. Thanks so much, Brittany, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're going to start off this session by starting with a poll question. So Brittany, if you can help me start that poll. So you can see there are the following: which is your biggest concern with AI and PR measurement? So just take a minute there to vote on that. And while you're doing that, again, just want to say, here's our research team, and the common denominator between the three of us is that we are all on the Measurement Commission. I've been a part of that group for 15 plus years, and it's just a great resource. And I encourage you to follow along some of the work that we do, and I'm always open to your ideas and questions. All right, so I think, are we ready now at this point, Angela, to show the results of this poll?
Yes, I think so. I think we had enough responses.
Okay. So bad data, 46%. That's what I would probably put there. Lack of transparency, 14. Biases, 12%. No rules or regulations, 19%. And I just don't understand how it all works at 10%. Well, thank you for doing that. And we're going to dive into some of this moving forward. We'll get started.
Okay, perfect. And I know we did introductions at the beginning. Do we want to say anything else about that? Do we feel pretty good? All right. All right. Well, delighted to be with you. Angela Dwyer, head of insights and our head of IPR Measurement Commission. I was really interested to see that 0% say, I don't have any concerns at all. It's all great. So I'm glad you're all here. We're going to talk about some concerns, but also some solutions, some things that have come up in our study that we hope can be helpful as you navigate this world of AI. So with that, I'm going to kick us off here. And the first thing I want to talk about is why this study and why now? AI is not new. It's actually been around a long time. In fact, one researcher who we quote in our study, Anna Adi, she described AI as the old new buzzword. But for many of us, it feels new. And I think that's for two main reasons. So the first one is that the accessibility of AI and generative AI, it drives interest. It is much more widely available with large language models like ChatGPT that can be accessed for free or at a low cost. In fact, ChatGPT grew its user base to 1 million in just 5 days. That's something that took Instagram 2.5 months to do. So obviously there's interest. The second is just the rapid pace of technology advancement. It has led to AI tools being developed at a much quicker pace than past development. In fact, one statistic I've heard is that 100 apps with AI launch every single day. So there's just a lot of development, a lot of new tools and different technologies being advanced. Well, there's been so much talk about AI and PR. I was actually thinking about, it must have been 3 years ago, I presented at a PRSA Icon National Conference. And when I presented, I was actually talking about predictive AI. And I was talking about some technology in predictive AI and how we use it to uncover trends or risks. Well, it was the only session that mentioned the word AI. And by the way, I don't think that many people were interested in it. I was in like a small room, right? It wasn't the big thing that everybody wanted to hear about. Well, fast forward just 1 year, almost every single session was about AI. In fact, I decided to not talk about AI at that point because everything was about AI. So it just shows how quickly this interest has happened. And there's a lot of talk of AI, and it's being used mostly, even today, in content creation and not necessarily in measurement. So that really makes measurement a bit of an untouched topic. And so we decided that it deserved some attention and discovery because not only is it less touched, it's a high consequence area. The results can be used to drive business decisions, not just write a social media post. So there's higher consequences when we're using it in measurement. Recent AI advancements have created urgent questions about things like transparency, privacy, bias, confidentiality. There are often concerns about not necessarily answers. So what we think is the train, it's not stopping or slowing. We need to jump on, and we need to provide AI measurement guardrails in order to both prevent a potential train wreck, but also to accelerate the benefits, get from point A to point B more effectively. So let's just start with some definitions of AI. When we hear this term, we may have an overly narrow or an overly expansive idea. AI simply means machines that simulate human intelligence in some form. There are kind of two main buckets. There's the artificial narrow intelligence. This includes basic machine learning that's been around for a long time, such as natural language processing, right? We were doing this 15 years ago at my media monitoring and analysis company where I worked. We were training models to identify themes and topics. It was essentially advanced Boolean. Well, generative AI actually fits in here too. Generative AI is creating new content, whether it's images, text, music, based on patterns learned from data. So not just filtering through data, but creating something new that is learned from patterns. Well, this is not to be confused with artificial general intelligence. This is basically something that can match or outdo the cognitive abilities of humans for any task. Well, we're not there yet. Some believe it could happen in 5 years, some 25, and some not at all. What do you think? I think it's going to use a lot of energy. So how is AI being used in PR measurement? Well, as I mentioned, it's not widely being used in measurement, but the adoption is increasing. And it is showing up in areas like media monitoring, audience analysis, issues management, trend prediction. I think that's one of the first areas. Surfacing dis or misinformation. These are some ways we are seeing it in measurement. Well, based on one survey, and this is from 2021, so it's a little bit old, 40% of communicators were excited about possibilities of AI. But at the same time, in that same survey, 17% said they had limited knowledge. Well, what I think is funny is in another survey, this is from 2023, so fast forward 2 years, 43% say they have limited knowledge. So as we learned more, we felt we knew less, right? We're obviously learning more about AI, but feeling like we know less. I don't know if you feel that way. I feel that way. The more I know, the more I don't know. And more than half at that time did not use AI tools in their PR roles. So in short, PR or comms practitioners are excited about something they know little of and have little experience with, which is why we decided to conduct this study. And we're really looking at the role of AI in measurement, specifically what are concerns that communicators have around generative AI and measurement evaluation. And as our second question, what are some guardrails that we should implement to responsibly use Gen AI in comms measurement and evaluation?
All right, so thank you, Angela. I will take over here as far as telling you what we did then in terms of the study itself. And so as measurement people, we'll give you the nuts and bolts here a little bit about who we talk to and how we talk to them. So we ended up using a mixed method approach of both quantitative in terms of a survey as well as qualitative in terms of a focus group. In the focus group itself, we had a decent-sized focus group of 13 professionals from the IPR Measurement Commission itself. So in terms of this study, if you feel like you're, a leader in measurement in particular, and then also gauging your sense of knowledge of AI within measurement. So we have a very focused group of professionals. If you feel like that maybe doesn't relate to you, and these are the type of people that you go to then for your expertise, hopefully that gives you some perspective of even what they know or what they're working with based on the findings that we have here, as well as updating these through 2024 as when we conducted our study. And so the group itself, what we ended up having was 35% of the IPR Measurement Commission participate. So we actually had a pretty good a sample from our overall population. These professionals were across the board in terms of professional background. So we have different CEO, corporation types, university professionals or researchers, as well as different members from trade associations. We then proceeded through kind of a traditional format of coding these focus groups. Now, in terms of the survey, a separate survey was sent out to a very similar population to get some of these quantitative metrics. We had 40 respondents from this professional group. To give you a perspective again of the types of folks that we were speaking to, over half had over 15 years of experience, especially within, again, this realm of public relations and measurement. And the goal of this was to answer the following set of questions as far as concerns, some of which you've already mentioned in your own poll taking at the beginning, as well as then what do we do about it? And so the first question set of data that we asked, though, is sometimes the most interesting, which is just usage. And so in our next slide, we just captured how are people actually using AI overall at all, right? And sometimes I think that this is the most interesting part of a study in the sense that when we're doing a study like this, we're always looking for the results of the RQs themselves, but it always has these assumptions of what do we even know or how much we're even using these things. And what we found that I'll walk you through is actually pretty similar to what maybe some of you experienced in those poll findings at the beginning of this. And that's that overall, in most of these categories that we asked 5 big categories, and I'll walk you through each one of these line items, but you'll see even before you read the fine print on the left is never dominates. So again, the overall goal here was to see how you're using AI, and what you're seeing is a whole lot of nevers, and then a decent amount of the rarely, occasionally, and oftens. So as we go through this, a little bit again, what you're seeing. So in the top 2 categories on the left, you see organized qualitative feedback from audiences. About half are never using it for that purpose at all, right? And then you still get a decent amount of folks that say rarely. On the far right, you're getting the people that are using it every day, and that's about 5%. And you're seeing that 5.12% in 3 of those categories. That's about 2 of the professional leaders in this area, right? Based on our sample size. And what you're seeing then is that you've got, even within a select group, you have about, 5% of us using these things kind of routinely, across the board. And then a large group of us using it never, and then a few of us maybe dabbling in one particular task in a very limited way. So the other categories that we measured, also with the majority of people finding or saying that they never use something, we're using AI algorithms for purposes such as like identifying your audiences, especially around whether that's reaching target audiences or working with influencers, however they define that. Again, you found very low use. For those, like Angela was saying, that might use it in more of a predictive way, that can be something like risk assessment or finding opportunities for your audience. And what you're seeing is there's a slight uptick of some people using it, at least in the rarely or occasionally, but we're still pretty low across the board. Social listening, you see, has the biggest standard deviation of use. And so we're getting a red box at the 5s and the 1s. So people kind of strongly agreeing. So about a 4th of us are using it for a daily task, but a 4th of us are still never using it even for that. So many of you, right, in PR can come from different backgrounds, but this type of analysis would arguably make the most sense of some kind of modern digital audience assessment of what's going on in terms of your listening, and then what it relates to as far as strategy or just kind of gauging your audience. And I saw in the chat just briefly, the study actually comes out in about a week, so in the PR journal. And so all these slides will be shared, but if you actually want to go through the nuts and bolts even further than the presentation, you'll all have that. So it's like a pre-pitch launch today for everybody. And then finally, the last one, again, we're seeing pretty low numbers, but some people are using it essentially for some of their own generative purposes, from putting together a presentation like today, or your pitch decks, your slide decks, however you might want to use them down the road. But again, overall, what we found is from the outset, even amongst this kind of select group, you're still seeing a lot of non-usage and a lot of probably confusion or limited usage in many of these categories, other than a few experts within this. So in our next slide, we'll get to, okay, so what did we find then as far as our main RQs? And so the first big category was similar to your poll question, which is what are the concerns here? Here are the big takeaways, and then I'll show you a big data set of slides that I'll slowly walk you through on the next one. Overall, there is a general sense that AI, of course, enhances measurement, especially from a quantitative data perspective. We might think that it's able to do data a lot better, or at least assist us in many ways to find different results. But even with that, there's a large gap in terms of AI training or knowledge of how to use it, and then concerns around transparency and bias. So let's break that down here into 9 different categories. And so I'll start, we kind of chunk these into 3 groups. And so again, a 5 here is a strongly agree. So this is where people are most in uniform decision. When you're getting in the 3s in the middle, that could either be kind of a neutral decision or neither agree or disagree. And then we're actually seeing some disagreement with these statements on the right. So let's walk through with this for you on the left. Where do you find the highest score? It's this general finding that people do find that AI technologies, however broadly defined, are still enhancing communication measurement and evaluation. We see the benefit here. People want to keep going. But then we get to those concerns down below, which is that lack of knowledge, which many of you noted yourself. And so what you're finding is there's a lack of knowledge in a few different ways. In this particular question, we were asking about things like how to train an AI system and what goes into it. And so related to that are things like a lack of transparency. Now, a lack of transparency can mean things like what goes into the machine itself. So here we were talking about how data sets themselves are like using AI, or how they're training AI into that. And so the quality of the data going in, and in our qualitative findings, we'll talk about that more. But then in some of these categories, we're also seeing the transparency on the back end of how it's used. And I'll get to that in a few of these other categories. So here in the middle, where we were seeing moderately general agreement, are with some of more like the societal findings. And so are we concerned about things like ethics, copyright infringement, whether the information is confidential? You're still seeing some overall agreement with it, right? But it's almost more in that third person than some of these first categories are, for many respondents, can be, do you have the knowledge, or do you have concerns about transparency in some ways? And so in the middle, we also then see in this middle of the middle boxes also concerns about data privacy and protection. Most people agree, but not as high, right, as some of these kind of first-person categories, again, a societal measure. And then here in the last box of the center, we're also finding some agreement, but some kind of neutral findings on whether you have issues separating out human data versus non-human data. Also around the center in the upper right are generally people kind of being mixed on whether they find AI being helpful from a measurement perspective in terms of being accurate around social media conversations. It's not necessarily a bad score in some ways, right? But if we're generally kind of on the 50-50 line from a mean score perspective, and I know I'm merging 2 different forms of measurement, but you're about at that 50-50 line of how accurate people are actually perceiving this to be. So these bottom 2, as far as the areas where people have the biggest disagreements with the statement, are coming down to whether technology partners themselves are becoming more transparent. And so we're going to come back to this as far as a recommendation of, let's say that you're one of those people that are not running the data, or like the data nerds, but, and we say that lovingly about ourselves, by the way, But you're getting this data, right? Or you're asking those vendors on what you want from it. You're seeing an overall sense of concern from that transparency element. And then overall, as it relates to things like accuracy then in the data that it's being sent out, there's a big concern about, are these types of measures actually capturing the diversity of audiences? Whether that is a smaller audience, and let's say that you work in a community of 3,000 people, but there's still great diversity within that, or whether you're a global entity that's trying to capture maybe a mean score from a population of 8 billion people in the world. So our next and last category from the quant findings were then, what are our guardrails? And our main findings that I'll show you in the next slide are that overall organizations themselves need to have clearer processes and guidelines, right? And this is something that some of you also noted in that first survey today of being a concern in terms of the process of the data. And then overall, there's this strong agreement across professionals that AI can still be then beneficial in terms of balancing both the human and an AI, the machine itself, right, for a few different capabilities. So I'll run you through this last data set here from the quant.
So before that, should we pause and do a poll, everyone?
Oh yeah, sorry about that. We have another poll before we show you the results.
Yeah. Okay, I see that. Been launched. Thank you.
All right, we'll give you about 10 more seconds and then we'll see these results. All right, feel free to still add them in the chat if you'd like. We can pull up the results that are in. So overall, we've got balancing AI measurement with human analysis. Half of you scored that one. And then a fourth of you picked establishing ethical guidelines. About a tenth of you and third picked the disclosing which portion of analysis is automated or AI generated. So that last point that we had. And then you've got 6% and 8% with participating in development or implementation of the technology itself, or the last one, ensuring a process to address bias. Okay, so we have some clear trends there with those balances up at the top. So here's how it came out with the professionals in the group. And what you're seeing is, again, a very high score with everybody essentially kind of coupling with the notion of we want that balance of using it, but using it with humans and machines working together. What that means then is also a very strong agreement with the need for these ethical guidelines being established, right? And we can break down as a group and even in the QA, what do we even mean by ethics? And you'll see that in the qualitative scores as well coming up, or the qualitative findings. In our third category, we're still seeing high agreement overall. Again, we're still well above a 4 in terms of communicators affected by generated AI having a voice in that development. So for those that mentioned kind of having that voice in the process, you can see how that could impact anything from copyright, right, to biases or other things that are being implemented in that process. You then again are seeing lower scores, but some agreement with almost like your individual role or your organization's role within this, right? And that's a great thing that we'll talk about later on today, which is, should you disclose to a client essentially how the automation is working with the humans? You're still seeing slight agreement, but we're now in the mid 3s instead of the mid 4s. And then you're seeing around a 3, actually below a 3, when you're looking at things like, how's your own organization doing? This probably doesn't surprise a lot of you who had questions of, I have no idea. Because again, even within this realm, you're seeing less than, right, the median score or the mean score on, does your organization itself have a process to address perceived bias? And you're seeing a lower than 3-point score overall. So I'll pitch the baton now to get you to our very rich qualitative findings from the focus group.
We're going to move over to our focus group, and as we mentioned in the method, we looked at that thematically, and we generated 4 key insights that we'll briefly touch upon in the next 10 minutes. And one is the pressure to balance AI measurement adoption amidst this uncertainty and time pressures. 2, organizational liabilities of using AI for measurement. 3, trust in humans and not the machine, and 4, AI measurement standards. So as we move to the next slide, the first theme here, and I want to remind you and preface this, that we were talking to very seasoned senior level measurement and evaluation professionals. The IPR Measurement Commission is comprised of people who are at the big companies. And these are like the VP of measurement and evaluation, or at research firms, or at agencies, at universities. And so the first thing that they really talked about was how much uncertainty they're feeling right now and the time pressures. And so if we're all here to learn more, they're feeling it as well. And these are kind of the leaders in this space. And they talked about the pressure to kind of keep up with that, because it takes so much time to learn about these tools and to play around with them. And then to realize, was that worth the effort? And what is the quality of the output that I'm getting from using some of these AI tool approaches and efforts? Mentioning that black box when talking to clients, and clients are asking questions about how does that algorithm work? And those are some hard questions to answer, because that's not always transparent from the vendors of the tools in which we are using. Our participants also talked about, again, this conundrum of really trying to adopt. We don't want to be left behind. We want to move forward. We want to be more efficient and effective in our work. But on the other hand, we don't ever want to compromise our accuracy. And there definitely is a fear of missing out, that we would be left behind, and we're going to lose business because of that, because we're not up to speed on how these tools are working. And there was some conversation about how does AI affect the billing structure today in firms and agencies, when these tools can perhaps make things more effective. What is the level of transparency we're giving our clients, and how we're using these tools from a billing perspective? So again, you can see some of the quotes there. On the far right, there's a bunch of cowboys running it, and everyone seems to think they are an expert, but they're really not. Someone mentioned an analogy to a poet getting inspiration for a poem with a walk through the woods, and expressing the need for thought time to tinker with our little monster of analysis.
Our second main theme that we found in our focus group was all around organizational liabilities. There were actually 5 that showed up in our conversation. The first one is around copyright and legal issues. So when we're thinking about that, it's a hot topic. I'm in media monitoring and measurement, and we're always making sure that we have a subscription for every single person who sees a news article, to make sure we are copyright compliant, and that those who created the work, written the articles, receive compensation. So some data may be private, and it may be illegal or unethical to train models on this data. You might even remember that the New York Times even sued OpenAI for the use of copyrighted material. These were articles used to train the model. And it's not just inbound content, but also outbound creations. Do you know that there are no copyright, or there's no copyright for content that is not created by humans? You might be familiar with this little monkey here. You may have heard the story of the monkey selfies. They got a hold of the camera, and the owner of the camera does not actually have right to these photos, and neither does the monkey. So what will happen with AI created content was a big question in our conversations. And last but not least were the environmental liabilities that could exist due to energy needed to invest in cool chips and processing power, and it could almost lead to some incohesive sustainability messaging, since an organization may save money or help the environment in one area while simultaneously burning energy using AI. Next was garbage in, garbage out. This actually stood out as the most used phrase in our focus group. One participant mentioned that the result of junk that doesn't convey anything. So essentially, if bad data is feeding models, it will only lead to inaccurate outputs. And do you really want to be making business decisions with research that means nothing, because it started with inaccurate building blocks? And another participant said, if the building blocks don't get it right, the whole system suffers. The third theme under this overall organization liabilities was not just about bad data, but issues with the models themselves. As we heard earlier, many participants use the term black box. We just don't understand what's under the hood. Well, participants mentioned that some automated media analysis tools might have 65% accuracy, some as low as 40%. Do you really want to make decisions based on a toss of a coin? Sorry about that. One of my favorite quotes was talking about the very vanilla implementations of some comms tech tools that just end up being unuseful. So in creating a tool that works for everyone, sometimes these solutions end up not bringing any value to anyone. In fact, poor data quality can actually cost companies in time and money. So this came up in the conversation about some of the harmful consequences of poorly informed business decisions and negative financial impacts. Another concern under this umbrella was just biases. This could be confirmation bias or bias of training data. The machines have to get their content from somewhere, and the creator of that content will have bias. We all have biases. One participant explained that his internal AI machine was trained mostly by content written by middle-aged white men. You could imagine some bias there. And last but not least, in this category of organization liabilities, surface the theme of error acceleration. The concerns are not just about the data inaccuracies, but the speed of error spread with AI. Fast forward another 10 years and you're analyzing AI with AI. It's dog eating its own dog food. This was one of my favorite quotes because it's true, right? The risk of human error is actually amplified by machines. If you have one human doing something that's bad, they're limited by their humanness, as one of our participants said. But a computer or a network isn't limited in the same way. So one mistake can then be replicated, right? Talking about the virality, the velocity of a problem. The next theme in our focus group of findings was all about trust in humans and not the machine. Now, comms measurement leaders, they really emphasize the necessity of human oversight and lack of trust in results generated by AI-powered tools without human validation. As we saw from our poll, 50% of people, so most people who responded in terms of concerns, was around this AI with human, right? And that this might be a guardrail that we would need to put in place to kind of protect this. One of the things we need to remember is humans are driving the car, right? We are in the end responsible. We can't put blame somewhere else. In fact, executives and clients trust AI results when they trust the human presenting or sharing the results. So one executive or one leader in our conversation mentioned that his executive said, when you walk into my door with a deliverable, I trust that it is vetted because I trust you. No pressure if you're the one delivering this information. Well, it's not all doom and gloom. Some participants even expressed optimism. They saw a future of increased trust in the machines with more human in the loop training.
And finally, someone asked about what are the solutions here. I think there was a consensus among participants in both the qualitative and quantitative, really about the need for AI standards, that really we need to come together at this point in time to develop these trusted measurement practices, approaches, and standards. This is going to take the work of both academics and associations, professionals, AMEC, IPR Measurement and Evaluation Commission. Now is the time to do some testing of these models and to share those results for the larger community. And there were a few people who said, even if you're transparent that you're using AI for measurement and evaluation, there are still other bigger picture concerns to think about in terms of bad data and accuracy.
All right, so the so what, and so I'll build off of the of where Julie kind of left us off there of taking together all of our findings and our discussions with everyone as well as beyond that and trying to turn them into tangible recommendations that we can leave you with both today, but if you're looking at these slides. Before we get to our 7 recommendations, which we have here at the bottom in terms of like an overall framework, just some highlights here to kind of summarize what we found between some of these dots were also just the notion of, right, we have this quickly moving train and yet we still feel like we're very much in this exploration stage, right? And that has a lot of challenges in itself. The sense of excitement is clearly there throughout all of these findings, but then also this issue with keeping up. And we just want to note that meant keeping up with all of these different tools, even the acceleration of advancements within a particular tool yourself. So a lot of you might be working in a situation where you might only have a license for one tool or two tools, right? As well as what else do we not know beyond that? So whether that's environmental impacts that might be impacting our organization if we adopt some of these, to anything else that might be happening in broader society. Again, some of the big takeaways, keywords were efficiency versus knowledge. So again, that's knowledge generation as well as knowledge of what goes in. When we talk about, I've seen a couple questions of like bad data, and generally we're talking about it in the context of accuracy or validity of things, but then also things like accuracy as it relates to the diversity of content going in, the diversity of audiences that are being analyzed or trying to be reached. And then finally, a lot of questions relate to the process versus the societal impacts. And I think just to reemphasize some of the highlights that we shared, it's interesting, right, that overall people are concerned with impacts, but they're definitely concerned with some of those first-person impacts that we were talking about. So if you're the one receiving the data, we're concerned about then sharing that data with our clients, right, or making decisions internally a lot. Right? Whether that's your own reputation then on the line or your own impacts on your own business. But you still see this disconnect a little bit that then becomes really important for us to think about, where it's still important, but we find slightly different results than maybe if we sent this to a group of lawyers on copyright, who would say copyright, if they're copyright lawyers, the number one thing. We're often finding things like copyright or data privacy are important, but maybe in the second tier of importance. And then that means we as a group need to kind of collect that, right? Or catch that and then come up with these recommendations on what to do. So here are our 7 frameworks. I'll give you the first 4. So our first framework then recommendation is, again, catch the moving train. And we thought about this in the sense of we want to emphasize the train is already moving. The train has been moving for a long time, as Angela started us with. But then, right, it continues to go down that track at a very, very quick pace. Because even by the time that we've had this 1-hour conversation by the end of this journey today, think about how some of these language models might have done a tenth of what they needed to start from scratch on their latest project. And the answers that we're giving you today are going to be different than, if you re-download these slides tomorrow on some of these questions. And so it's all the more important that we actually have to not only develop these standards, but develop these standards very quickly. But then in this last bullet point here, have a knowledge that this is not something like we've operated in before, where in measurement, we've had things like Barcelona principles, and then we'll have Barcelona principles 2.0, and there are big changes in technology. Or if you think of something like the labor unions in the entertainment industry, so where I started my career, like every time the VCR would be created, or then Netflix would be created, it might be almost a generation or half a generation of technology changes. And now we're in a situation where even waiting a year of updating these things would be far too long in many different cases. So that need to also be quickly adapting. So our second recommendation comes from then creating comm channels with experts themselves, but also amongst ourselves. And so we've given you data today from the experts themselves, and clearly they need to be talking with each other, or create more pipelines beyond even just our measurement commission meetings and things like that. But if we've got 2 or 3 professionals in this sector doing this, and then we've got 10 people over here that still feel lost, right? Those channels need to happen at the top end. But then how do we create these communication channels for everybody else that might not just find themselves in this space? So how do you speak to your own leadership, or if you're a leader within your own organization, how do you speak out to this kind of framework that we're recommending here today? So our third recommendation is our next slide here. So applying this leadership then to this commission. So we're recommending overall, and we heard that essentially from like everybody, that we need an industry leadership commission to define everything, all of the questions that are probably in your head, all of the questions that you're asking to today, anything again from bad data and what it means to what are our transparency standards and guidelines. There are vacuums across the board. So this is not a singular or like a linear vacuum. This is a bunch of intersecting different categories of questions that people have. and building those kind of guideline applications beyond just the industry itself, but also we'll see on the next recommendation, partnering then with academics. And so that's our fourth one here on the next slide, Angela. Yep, there we go. So IPR Bridge, if you've never heard of it, if you're new to IPR, it's always in the spring. So our next one's coming up in April in DC. And it's this notion that a lot of us have different questions for different reasons. So some of those questions we can't necessarily either answer ourselves or share that knowledge ourselves, especially if you're internal or you're on the agency side. And a lot of that might be protected data, or you really maybe want to share this answer, but you feel limited in certain ways. On the flip side, right, academics might not have that sales bias. So when it comes to things around ethics or general knowledge or theory building, but they themselves then can't apply that to industry. And so our fourth recommendation then is, again, noting that we really have to have this balance between this professionally oriented group with some of that academic or non-sales driven knowledge to come up with the proper ethics.
Our fifth kind of major recommendation is to never lose focus on the basics. I teach research at TCU. I've taught a social listening class, and it's really easy, including myself, to get kind of taken up with all the visuals and all the things I can do with something like Sprinkler or Brandwatch. But as I always remind my students, we go back to the basics, and how does this, what we're seeing here with AI, how does it help us to better understand our organizational and societal goals in which we are aligning our communication programming? We always are trying to look at outcomes when possible, or to align our outputs with those outcomes. And I think this is we're kind of in a similar time right now with AI, almost when we were like with the Barcelona principles, when we were trying to develop standards for measuring social media when it was becoming just so popular. So again, I think the basics can never are always a safe bet. Moving on to the next slide, again, and I think as Lightning talked about the importance of ethics and accuracy. I think someone said, well, what are the solutions? This is where we are, and they have to be developed about copyright, data privacy, and transparency. I think that we need to focus on data validity issues, such as the diversity of audiences, right? How was this AI tool created, based upon what information, what data? Data validity issues related to predictive analytics. So I think that's kind of where we are right now. It's a profession. Education, the leaders, in terms of the time, you heard the continual emphasis about how important it is to keep up with this. And I don't know the solution. I think everyone on this call is a very busy person. And so, microbites, webinars, sandbox approaches, but we have to jump in and educate ourselves. And I think we'll stop here, and then we're going to take some questions. I think kind of our call to action would be to get involved with the Global Data Quality Initiative. One of the members, Rob Key, who's a very active member on our IPR Measurement Commission, is spearheading this effort. And that it's a collaborative group, and I know AMEC is also involved. And its mission is to build confidence in the data we collect and deliver through data quality guidance and standards that enhance the value of research. So if you are interested, if you are passionate, please check them out and get involved in that process. I want to say thank you. And at this point, we will open it up for some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. Yeah, as there's been some questions in the chat and in the Q&A, so we'll filter through some of those. Julie, there's a question from Brian Allen. For your social listening class, what books or textbooks are you using or can recommend to learn more about social listening?
That is a fantastic question. It's been really hard because there's not just a great book that I use. I've used Dr. Karen Freeberg's social data or social media book and pulled out chapters. I actually use a lot of articles rather than books. I've used some of Jim McNamara's book of articles about listening. I've used some of the tools or the articles related to Brainwatch and Sprinkler that they offer educators. But there's not one textbook that I use. I've used some IPR papers as well. So that's a long answer to your question.
Another question. What are some of the most innovative AI applications you've seen from a measurement perspective?
I can chime in here. Thank you for your question. What I found that's actually been most effective are the kind of created tools, essentially. When you get one of these out of the box tools, that's where we're often finding some of these issues because they haven't been trained enough on a trusted set of data. So where I'm seeing things that are working well is usually when someone's created their own kind of in-house application. I do a lot of that at Fullintel. Rob, who we mentioned, does that at Conversion. And we're always looking at this key factor, which is kind of our accuracy to human. So when I pick up a model that's not very well trained, you don't know what you're going to get out of it, right? At one point, I actually did a side-by-side comparison of 6 different machine learning models, and I just wanted to test sentiment of articles, right? Just looking at the sentiment of news articles. Again, my accuracy to human was really low, right? It was, in that 40 to 60 range. But when you test a model that's trained on a bigger set of data, it's going to give you more accurate results, more trusted results. So in terms of specific applications, again, the most successful I've seen are kind of those tailored ones. You can always start with some of, the bigger ones. You're always going to get better quality in the paid versions, right? Even of like a GPT, you're going to get better quality, especially then you're going to get in the open version or in the Gemini that people are using for content. So in terms of that, I would say kind of those more specific. And then if you're looking at anything, always ask questions about what is it trained on, right? So one of the things that I always say is, okay, this is 10 years of data that it was trained on. So now I know my model is going to be quite good, quite accurate. We've developed models that are really accurate to what I might get with a human, but it's all about the amount of data it's trained on and how good that data is to start with. So at least I can give you some questions to ask as you're exploring different tools or applications. There's a lot out there now. So just ask those questions when you're exploring what you might be able to use.
Yeah, I can build on that space a little bit. I think there's a mix of answers as far as how innovative we have been within PR, but also especially PR measurement. In some ways, and this might get a little bit to the next question, too, is we can be limited, I think, the more traditional the topic of PR is. And so when we're still looking at PR from a more of a classic media relations perspective, especially when you're thinking of legacy media, I think that's where a lot of us start with, but also where I generally hear the most complaints of whether it's limited in the data set, right? Whether it's only considering certain kind of news models or whether it's looking at social media almost too much in the macro versus tools that were always kind of built, born and raised in like a social media space versus a legacy media space. They live with the nuance sometimes of the differences between TikTok or X, but also then they're looking at the nuance of media more broadly. I think where you also need to consider what we think of as innovative are often running into walls of what you might want, and whether that's you as an individual or you as a society. And that relates to a lot of the guidelines then that we have to discuss, is because the more innovative I've seen some of these things, the more you get into especially issues with privacy, as well as your role of digital elements kind of coming into that. And what I mean by that is there are like very strong limitations in several EU markets, for example, because they might look at the US use of privacy data as the wild, wild west, as you saw in some of those quotes. Some of the most innovative tools I've seen for years, like I still think like, wow, the US market in particular is like so far behind what I was working with in East Asian markets, especially like almost a decade ago at this point. It's hard to believe like 2015 is like a decade ago now. But the intersection of a lot of those markets also developed quicker in like a digital sphere, because they kind of went from 0 to 60 in certain markets or countries or tools, where it's like TikTok becomes like this overnight versus like a slow progress of what Facebook might be now. And what that meant is I think a lot of the most innovative tools are around like predictive behaviors or audience analysis or sentiment with the intersection of PR and e-commerce in particular. So, our ability to ask you like a poll question in kind of a business webinar presentation like this, but like on super duper steroids, as you're ordering your Taco Bell, watching your Netflix at the same time, thinking about what you're watching on Amazon. So especially for like influencers and viral markets, I think that's where measurement and kind of that intersection of PR and e-commerce is expanded the most. But then again, it goes to a question of what are your government's legal realities? What is the comfort level or what is the ick factor with privacy and data within either that market or within that individual consumer or topic itself? In other words, we might treat, even if you're cool with Taco Bell knowing about you, you might feel weirder if your health professionals are using it in this way or vice versa.
Maybe I'm just going to read this question out loud, perhaps for either Lightning, Angela, or myself, and I'm going to go from the bottom up. How can AI be used to facilitate fast qualitative media measurement analysis? Can you provide examples of how it can assist in this space? I've personally used some of these pretty expensive tools, such as BrandWatch, to do that, and you can tell it to analyze it for you thematically and by sentiment. I think there's a lot of questions about the accuracy of that. And there's nothing like maybe doing a little test of that. You can look at the charts and maybe get in there and look at some of the results yourself and get into the weeds and see, do I agree with how this is being coded? But that's been my experience with a qualitative assessment using AI.
Yeah, I think you can ask things like, what are the reputation drivers? What are the biggest concerns right now? There's a lot of AI models that do that well. And the best ones will actually use a combination of two models. Okay, so you may have heard the term like RAG model. A lot of the models are either on your own data, but if you can bring in an outside model, it reduces hallucination and increases the trust. So when I use an AI model, we're using something on our own data, which is just news media that we've filtered so we know there's no junk or noise in that. And that's what I start off of. And then we'll kind of bring in a second model. So again, I would just say, ask questions and like that, right? Is this one model? Are there two models? What's the data it's trained off of? I see a kind of a question that goes along with this from Mark Lewis about, large organizations using PR measurement firms to, where does the transparency lie? So a few things on that is one, I think there's greater tolerance of inaccurate data, but I don't think that's really a great thing because of, again, how this data can spread. So who needs to be transparent? I think there's multiple layers here. So let's say you're using a third party to do your measurement. They should be transparent, right, with the organization, with those PR leads about what they're considering. And we had a question about bad data. It's how the data is processed, but also what's being filtered in. So the sources of the content itself. That can also lead to what we call bad data, right, or inaccurate data. So one, they should be responsible. And that's kind of what this global data quality initiative is all about. It's saying that it's unethical for you to share something if you haven't actually tested it or there hasn't been some transparency. But it also means if you're within an organization, right, you're the client, and now you're going to share this with your executive, you're responsible, right? You need to also be transparent and understand what you're sharing. Because remember, it's about the person who's sharing it that makes someone trust it. So your executive is going to trust it because they trust you. So you need to do the due diligence to make sure that what you're receiving, you understand. So it kind of is a two-level need for transparency. So I would recommend, if you're from a third-party firm, for example, think about how you can be a little more transparent with those you work with. If you're from an organization using one of these firms, ask a few more questions, right? Make sure you have those answers so that when you share it, you're confident and you can be a little more transparent. So I think it needs to be increased across the board. And that lack of transparency has increased this tolerance, again, for 60% accuracy. And we're making decisions off of that.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of questions about specific recommendations. I'll maybe take the lead on the cop-out answer of that of I don't like to necessarily like name specific ones, partly because we've got so many participants here who might be from different competitors too. But I will say some things to think about. One is, are you really using it? Are you really trying to seek AI for measurement purpose or some other purpose? And so like the question on qualitative, for example, I think a lot of what you might think of either like ones that pop into your head or even more basic, like a simple Copilot or Gemini, ones that you might just have easier access to, can still do a lot of the basic tools pretty well, but that's not necessarily meaning that they do the measurement tools for you as well. It's not that they're not good, but they don't necessarily have access to that data, which is why you end up going to your agency or that third party person. The way that I would recommend if you're like new to this or you want to test it out or you're getting pitches from people is think really critically about like try to think of the most unique questions that you have. Some of them can be random. Some of them hopefully can also be random sounding, but really important to you. So for example, so I work a lot with, especially like, where's the data set wrong or what's playing in that 12% that's not being answered, but is the only important thing to me. And so like test things that, again, do you have a name like mine? And I'm very serious about this. When I have a name like Lightning that means a lot of different things, I automatically use it as a default test to see how smart that AI is for my purposes. So do you work with like a brand that's more like a Target or an Apple or something like that, where the smallest thing could go wrong if you're using it for even a most basic press release assistance tool, let alone measurement? But it's a really good gauge of are they paying attention to your needs? And so think again about some of those common words or phrases, even that you think it might read wrong, and see if it does if you're getting those pitches. But also then try to think of one or two really specific, unique needs that you have in the measurement space, where you think, I wonder if this would be caught if even my competitor was using this. And that's a good way for you, for free normally, to get people to like give their pitch to you before you buy the license, or if they're giving like a free trial or something like that at work. Hopefully that's helpful.
I think that's a really great tip, Lightning, kind of do those little tests. And I see this question from Ron O'Brien, and I think it's such an interesting question about the measurement market. Will adapt and differentiate on the basis of accuracy, good vendors versus not so good, less expensive, less accurate. I think this is really interesting because you may have noticed this as well. With the speed that AI allows us to develop, we're having more and more what we're going to call vendors. I don't like to be called a vendor, but I'm going to use that term because we're using it here. But there's more of them, right? Someone who can develop some code says, "Oh, I can make that." Right. But there might not be all those checks and balances and quality, and it might be an affordable tool because they're not using human validation. So to some sense, I think that's actually true, that it might be a little more expensive because humans cost a little more money. Now, with that said, AI also costs money. It costs processing and energy, right? So there is also cost there. But at the end of the day, humans are going to have an added cost. So I think there is some truth to that. And I've already seen it in the industry. There's kind of this separation of those that are integrating humans in some form. And a lot of them are now, right? And either they started in human and then have added AI, or they started in AI and now they're adding human. So I'm seeing that's actually a positive trend with a lot of those, the companies offering this information. But I think that to your point, the ones that don't keep up with the accuracy are likely to fall away as users become more informed, which we hope they will be through our efforts and open communication around the role of AI in measurement.
Um, I think I think with that, that's about all the time we have for questions. I know that there were some extra, but our IPR Measurement Commission is wonderful at they've shared their LinkedIn's. Feel free to connect with them and ask your questions and connect with each other on LinkedIn to follow up about all the things we learned today, and then check out our report that will are in the Public Relations Journal that will be out next week. Thank you all so much for attending, and thank you, Dr. Czabovsky, Dr. O'Neill, and Angela for joining us and leading this session.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for all the good comments here. Have a good one.
Appreciate it. Bye.